Honestly, I think KC is quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
Like KC, I think that, the conversation about Caliste, right, is, I think regardless of how you put it in terms of the hype was built around, I think regardless of how he performed, regardless of how he played, he would have been overhyped. But I have to say, it's like how he played against Koi was so damn cold. It was so damn cold in terms of like some of those situations where he's like getting Caliste ulted and like how he just moves and doesn't like instantly flash, instantly cleanse. There's no jitters at all. He challenges, like he basically like throws down the rag on the floor and it like wants to fight. He believes in the idea and the information that is on the screen.
Holloway, like center of the ring now.
Yes, okay. Exactly. That's what I was thinking about. But in the end, it became a rag on the floor. It's like there were moments where he was like posturing 1v4, knowing exactly like the limits of the other champions, similar to what I described before in terms of how the macro game has progressed. It's like knowing what you can get away with the context of your champ to everybody else and the timing of everything. It's like if the enemy is not like walking towards you, Caliste is taking space. He's posturing on you, and it's rare that we get like good Varus performances in Europe, and that is what like a good Varus performance requires. You need to posture and find the Q angles and take space when you can, because this is how you get the good Rs and the good poke. And I think just that's such a good sign for his future. I was always hyped on Caliste because his approach to the game isn't necessarily that he's right now in the moment that he played in the LFL that he was the best, but you just know that the way he approaches each situation, he's trying to mechanically squeeze. It's not like, oh, we're going to win if I just do this. No, I want to win doing the absolute most. I don't mind if I slip a little bit along the way, but in this pursuit, I'll become better. And I think over time, Caliste is going to be so monstrous, but having this start is just perfect. I think just that Vladi, Caliste, these two guys in terms of how they judge real-time information, in terms of how they fight and how they play mechanically, you just know these guys are going to have an insanely good future in this league.
Yeah, and also, even though the roster was never bad on paper, they've hit the ground running. Like, most of the parts you wanted to look good have looked good. By the way, Yank looked good straight out the gate. I actually did think that was an obvious player that, like, it's a bit like the example of Jasun on BLG. It's like, first of all, why is he gone? Like, I thought he was doing totally fine in the team. It's almost like you've gone for some weird, we want something else from our squad. And then two, he's clearly a player where when he's on a team that doesn't have massive names, he can potentially be unleashed as well. Like, this guy actually is clearly a very good player. I also think the Vladdy guy did show last year on the Scuffed Carmine Corporate. He clearly had carry games. Like, for me, him and Jackie's were the two players that sort of came in way too late, but actually showed they were viable players who should be staying. And then Caliste has lived up to the hype, except obviously no one can. I know what you mean by that. The problem is when you've overhyped them, nobody could. You'd have to come in like Prime Uzi I on game one. He didn't, but I'll give you this. If you're someone that everyone's telling me is going to be like a stud carry ADC, then actually show me kind of like a nuanced Varus game in week one. That impresses me. That isn't the sort of player you expect to be the stud, balls to the wall, give me this and I carry the game. Like, but I know what you mean. It might sound weird to a fan. There's actually a player, if anyone follows Counter-Strike, there's a bit like this. I'll give a quick example without going too far. There's a player who plays for NIP. He's a Ukrainian AWPer called Wrinkle, right? And here's the thing. He's not one of the best AWPers right now, Yamato. He's not like anywhere close to the Monasees and the Zewus of the world. But what's awesome, and the reason why me and a lot of the experts are really interested in this player, is even right now as like a really rookie, inexperienced player, he plays like he thinks he's already simple. Like he already thinks he's the best player. And what's awesome about that is no one does that. You know this. Like, as you said, when you're on a low level, you play to the level of your opposition. That's what normal humans are like. I like players that play on the edge and believe, like Caps did when he came in the LEC, like, oh, if not like now, in 6 months, I'm going to be the best, or I'm going to be the second best, or I can compete with the absolute best. He's not going to come in and see Hans Sama and then be, oh, it's Hans Sama. Like, I want the guy that goes for it and thinks he's as good. So that aspect clearly is there to his game. It's why I actually think it's sad that they overhyped him, because if anything now, if the team does badly, I think people will probably blame this guy. Was actually, it does look like he's had a fabulous entry to the league. And then I'll throw it as well. Everyone is always going to be down on Targamas because of how the last few years have gone. But I don't think they're just idiots in this team. I'm sure they had other options for support. There's got to be some reason they've chosen to keep him here, or something they think they're going to offset. And at least thus far, it's been all right. It hasn't been a major problem. He's not. The problem we always have in League is I feel like this is actually why, by the way, I think all the Faker fans really get mad at us. It's not just that we're like pointing out Faker isn't the best. It's that they think because they keep saying he's the best all the time and we're saying he's not, that we're saying he's shit. So the problem is anytime someone isn't up to the expectations, especially if they're not a top player, everyone wants to dismiss them as like subhuman trash who can't press a key on the board or something. Like, look, certainly I have heard the comms in 2 different teams now where Targamas did not talk. It's like he didn't know the chat server was there. But I'll tell you what, he can clearly play some League of Legends when he's in the right spots, though. What do you think of that aspect of this team? Because obviously that's what our fans are always going to look at on paper and think is going to be the bottleneck or something. Is it going to matter if he follows Calist's lead? Does it matter? Can it work?
I do think like the big check mark that I was looking for in the KC games was just like how would Yike and Targamas cooperate? And in many moments, it's like when Targamas was playing melee supports, like with the Sejuani game, they were taking control over the map together. So like those ideas are like clearly spoken about. And I know that Yike also mentioned in the interview because he was asked like how is the communication with this team? Is that do you carry a big responsibility? And he said that Targamas talks a lot more than like people make it out to be. I do think, like, from my experience working with Targamas, like, the main thing for him was that it's like he would say things, but if he thought it was obvious, he didn't feel the need to say it.
Oh, right.
And I think in a lot of cases, like, this was something that I was trying to tap into and, like, unleash because he is very, very knowledgeable. Like, Targamas is very, very knowledgeable. Like, he always had, like, a lot of input when it came to, like, draft conversations and so forth. And I think that with players, like, knowing how they functioned with Caliste, the most surprising thing for me when they explained to me like how Caliste was in like when they were competing in the LFL and so forth was that Caliste was the one as the rookie coming into the team, 17 years old, was demanding shit from people.
All right.
Like, he was pushing people to play solo queue. He was demanding shit from people. Like he like hearing that from the rookie that just comes into the team is like, oh, like fuck the fuck are you doing? Just play some solo queue. I think that's like insanely, let's say, based. You know, it's just based. And Vladi the same way. It's like knowing how he communicates in Champions queue and looking at the pretty much just like the voice comms, which are very limited, but Vladi seems to also communicate like the right things and seems to keep like a very, very calm tone throughout the game, which I think is super, super cool because you don't, like the big question was like, who's going to communicate with this team? Yike was on G2, Targamas doesn't speak much, and you have 2 rookies and a Korean in the top lane that of course is limited in English, but I think in my mind, Caliste and Vladi are underrated in that aspect, and I'm very, very happy to see that Yike and Targamas are actually like actively like working together when they are playing the game, which is just such a big deal, you know. Just how they put down vision makes sense, how they move together makes sense. It means that they like have a very, very clear idea in mind because this was the main concern for KC.
Yes. And then obviously, if people don't remember, people just forget sometimes. This was 2 years ago, the team that was in the LFL with the players that later you got in KCorp. Obviously, the Rhea guy was their coach. So again, this is someone going for comfort and they know how these players operate and they have a pre-existing synergy potentially. So that's looked good so far. Because I do think the problem is people just take, ever since the XL season, like I say, people have just decided Targamas is never allowed to ever be good at League of Legends again. I'll just point this out. It wasn't like someone else pressed the keys when he was in G2. He did do all those roams and get all those fucking sick players off. Like, there's clearly something to his game. He's just, to me, he's one of those players that's like a bit of an enigma. Like you're saying, if you notice, it's not, you didn't make a point about how he plays or skill. You were talking about things like how does he communicate? What, like, does he need someone to lead him? What does he want? Maybe he doesn't communicate when he thinks you should know what he means. In some teams, they want you to calm everything. So yeah, it's just one of those scenarios where, again, it's environment. It depends who the other players are. I always think an underrated part of League is, in the same way as a great team is more than the sum of their parts, you need the other players also influence how each player in a team plays. It's why you never really can. Put it this way, it's why if one player's insane and then the rest of the team's complete shit, they probably are just insanely good at League of Legends. I think League isn't like Counter-Strike. In games like Counter-Strike, you can get yours, bro. You can kind of play your spots, shoot the guys and get the guns again. Like, you'll have chances if you're a truly great player. In League, team environment, how other people play, how people shot call, these are massively influential over how good someone's going to look.
100%. Like, we had the conversation, right? And there was the question is like, who are players that kind of raise the floor of a team like that Excel roster was like just filled with players that are like matching up to the level of the team.
Yes.
Like the Tagamas as a player, it's like where he had the most success right in the past was when he worked with Jankos and Synkrov. Very, very demanding players that of course know how to drive a game. And I think that as long as you understand like the person, it's like we took a very big risk with putting Bo and Pargamos together, but they both kind of needed someone to be capable of like driving the game, and to make Bo and Pargamos work together was something that required a lot more time than I was given at the time, of course. I think
for you, Mato. Right, obviously, people do forget that there was the Bo factor in this as well, right? We used to have a show in England. It was a celebrity show where you'd bring people on who were famous, or they were like sometimes members of the public. It was called "Can't Cook, Won't Cook." So the idea is you either just don't cook, so you know what you're doing, you have to do a recipe, or you just can't. You just shit at cooking, and they would make you something simple you could make yourself, right? Basically, the problem there is that's what Bo and Targamas was. There was can't speak English and won't speak English. That's my joke for you. Again, maybe that's just an if you know then you know sort of joke there, Yamato. We'll leave that one for the fans. That's something for the deep lore. So okay, what about though expectations for KCorp? Obviously it's only week one, but like what are your expectations for this team? What would be like a good split? How much potential do we have here?
I think that if they manage to break into top 3, I think that would be like a massive achievement. I think it's largely dependent on the form of like Fnatic and G2, but currently we have very interesting top 5 teams in Koi, GX, KC, Fnatic, and G2. I think these teams can be very competitive, and I think that there is like arguments to be made why somebody might land above anybody else, right? In that like top 3 bracket. Like I could still see, like I'm a big guy when it comes, like I'm big on like fucking experience. I believe in like the players of Fnatic and G2 to just like see the paths kind of in front of them as the season kind of unfolds, and knowing, you know, how to deal with the challenges that come. And I think that's like crucial. I think that ties into like coaching staff experience too, right? And I imagine that G2 and Fnatic is going to break into like be in that top 3. I think anything less would be like an underachievement, of course. But KC could definitely make an argument there, because one thing that really stood out to me is just their prep work. You know, it's like BO1s are very brutal, but I think that in terms of their draft approach, there was many strong ideas from the get-go. It's like the draft against G2, they understood the theme that the enemy was going for, and they dropped it, like they dropped into 4-5, got the Ezreal Alistar as well, which was super good. And also like that Koi victory was just like a strategic victory, because the enemy team had like the Caliste Renata, and then they went Xin Zhao Ahri with Kisanda. That's a composition that is very weak against the poke and the disengage, and you could see how KC real time really leveraged that. Like they were never in like these confrontations with this enemy draft. They were always poking, and this was of course the Varos game that we spoke about before. So I think in terms of what they are strategically, I think is a very good place, and there's a lot of hope and potential here for sure. I think LEC as a whole, just like the top 5 teams and the new names we have coming in, is just super exciting. It just feels so refreshing.
Put it this way, this is one of the few times I also feel a bit validated in not knowing some of the players from the ERLs. Because I always tell people, I only watch the really big games or the EU Masters playoffs of the ERLs. So crucially, the way I know if someone's going to be good usually is my friends who are coaches or other players tell me, oh, actually, watch out for that guy. Oh, this guy should be on the top team. You know, they give you the hype behind the scenes. So you get that of the Caliste, you get that from a Skewmond, you get that back in the day from a Yike, etc. These players, when they're coming through, they get that hype, and it travels out. It's like ripples in a pond. I'm at the edge of the pond, and it gets to me. And if it gets to me, that means there's real hype around this player. So one of the problems I have to say, Yamato, is I always do default, even though League is a bit different now, to I prefer the devil you know than the devil you don't. I'll always side, essentially, like I said about the example of like Skewmond. I would have stuck with what Yike was. I thought that was certainly good enough. It wasn't like a bottleneck to the team. It wasn't the reason you were losing the games. I think the gamble for Skewmond there is you're gambling on the world. You're gambling he's going to be way better even than Yike. So that's hard to do. So I have to say the 2 rosters that I looked at in this offseason was like, I don't expect anything from these rosters. So if they know better than me, I'll tip my hat to those coaching staff. They just get something I don't. Because when I looked at Vitality and Heretics rosters, I was just like, bro, I don't hear hype about most of these players. Like, even in the games I watched this week, look, the mid laners had a game or two that was all right. I'll give them that, right? But I also think you look at some of these players, fucking hell, this is what happens when you put a bunch of rookies and new squads together, mate. It can just come out a bit pear-shaped, as we say in England. It just doesn't work out necessarily, or it's clearly not what you were going for, etc. Like, see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.